Culture is the intersection of creativity and capitalism. Creators drive culture forward by sharing their craft with others. We're exploring the lives of amazing humans creating amazing things. This is Creator Craft with Adam Rivietz.
It's kind of more of like a gentle breeze of emotion that passes over me at certain times of the year. So I know, as his death date approaches, as Christmas time approaches, I start to kind of feel it in my bones, and I don't always remember it. And I know this with other people who have grieved, that you start to forget dates, right? And then all of a sudden you go, oh my God, like this was the date that he was diagnosed, or this is the date that we thought he was in remission, or this is the date that, he passed away. And it's not that you ever forget it. It's just you sometimes forget that things are coming. And I think your emotions sometimes know before your head does. So it's not as strong now. But, especially I've had a couple Negronis, I'm sitting on the couch and all of a sudden you watch, the wrong movie or hear the wrong song, you cry. And, that happened to me earlier this week. I was watching Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and there was just a scene, and I just started to break down. And it's nice though. That's what I found the most is grief is painful, but grief is powerful and grief is positive for me, because I think grief is a reminder of you had something important that you lost. And so while it's painful to realize that you've lost this thing, it's also really powerful and wonderful to say, God, like, I'm able to mourn this thing because I was so connected to this person. And so that's, I don't know, I think that there's a lot of good mixed in there. Super applicable, actually. So I actually was a double major, but only did one degree. So in poli-sci and history, which for me, I think this is my inherent distrust. I don't trust anybody with a marketing degree.
Okay.
Because they can't do it well, but because I think a lot of times marketing teaches you great theory and it says this is how you do it, but it suffers from a lack of perspective because you can't teach perspective. So that's my bias. It's not fair because I've met some really smart people with marketing degrees. But I think, being a strategist, and politics is all strategy, right? And so is history. And so for me, poli-sci and history taught me a few things. It taught me about how to be very, very analytical and sort of think about things in short and long-term scales. Because, as a historian, you sort of look at the course of thousands of years of history or hundreds of years in history, not, one day. And politically, you also have to take that standpoint too. So when I think about brand building, I don't think about what is this brand going to be looking like in 5 months? Maybe that's the brief, but the way I always approach it is, what is the thing that I'm doing in 5 months going to contribute to this brand 5 years down the line? So basically, I graduated school in poli-sci and took an internship actually at Bearing Point, which is no longer a thing, but at that point was one of the big management consulting firms, completely by accident. I had no idea what Bearing Point was. I just applied to an internship in public policy. So they had like a health group. So I basically worked with them. Then they hired me on. So I was kind of doing public health consulting. Bearing Point was falling apart at that point, and I jumped to Deloitte. And at Deloitte, did sort of various bits of management consulting and sort of weirdly project controller work. Because I think like I was just good at untangling numbers. I just got really tired of consulting. It wasn't a good fit for me, which I was told by a boss. She was like, when I left, she was like, yeah, this is probably not the right space for you. She's like, you're a smart kid, but like, this is not the space for creativity. So lesson learned, probably should have taken that leap and gone to advertising then, but I was really interested in sustainability. I'd always been really interested in it as a kid. So I was like, let's go get our master's. At that time, the field was a little going a few places. So Leeds had a 1-year master's. I thought, well, worst thing that happens is I spent a year of my life in England. Not too bad. So did that, and then worked for a startup in sustainability for a couple years after that. I was working in digital strategy for a small agency, and I got just interested in UX, and I thought they had an intensive, so it was one of these kind of like after work once a week for 8 weeks type of thing, just to kind of get your feet wet. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next, so I thought, okay, well, let's see if this UX thing pans out, and it eventually got me into my next job as an experienced strategist. I don't really do UX anymore. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually be useful. So, I think all this stuff has like contributed over time though, because I think UX just builds on understanding and analyzing and not judging people's behaviors, but accepting them and trying to sort of do something with them, which is really what advertising is. I think it teaches you respect for a customer. It teaches you hard work. It humbles you in certain ways, and also makes you realize what assholes people can be. So I think I always will trust somebody more that has food service or some sort of service profession on their resume than the person who did 15 internships at their daddy's job. No disrespect for those people, but I think it just teaches you how to deal with a lot of really difficult situations really quickly, differently than, frankly, a lot of white collar professions do. They're still really small because every holdco is made of agencies, and every agency is made of accounts. And so every account is kind of like its own boutique agency, really, if you treat it as that. You just have more access to resources. So it was hard for me because honestly, when I was at JWT, that was a time when they were going through a lot of turmoil. WPP was going through a lot of struggle. So the downside of that is you're at the mercy of everybody else. If part of the agency network isn't doing well, you're not doing well. So that's definitely a downside. But the upside is you can move around, you can work on big clients, you can you get a lot more access to resources. If you don't know how to do something, it's not just a go figure it out and go try to half-ass it. There are usually somebody that you can connect with in the network that can sort of get you there. So I think that they're great. They both have their benefits. They both have their disadvantages. I've been able to influence a lot more people being at the holdcos, just because of the nature of the brands that I've worked on. But at the same time, they're run much more financially. So you do sometimes miss that spark of like fun and let's do whatever the hell we want to do, because you got to make shareholders happy, and you got to make the higher ups their money, which is okay because that's just the nature of a corporation, but it is a trade-off. I definitely suffer from imposter syndrome, as do a ton of people. Um, and I think that this is a particular challenge of strategy. When you're in strategy at an agency, on one hand, you're really vaunted as being, often the smart kid in the room, for lack of a better term. Everybody that I work with is really smart. I will state that 100%. But like that's the expectation, is come in here and solve it with some real smart quip or something like that. The downside of strategy is there aren't many of us. I've never been in an agency where a strategy made up probably more than 10% of the entire agency, and that's being generous. So it's a tight group of people as a mindset, but it also means that if you're feeling bad and nobody else is in the office, that's in that space, there's no one to really turn to. So, it's great because I've got good coworkers that do give me an outlet, but I think agencies particularly are not structured in a way that gives us always positive ways to deal with what we're going through. It's a high stress environment. I think influencers are really important, especially now that we are living in a much more virtual society than we once were. I think initially it was kind of a cute little media tactic that people used because somebody said, oh, this person has a following. I do think, especially with e-com and e-tail, people are much more savvy about influencers and how the influencer network works. But I will say also, I've learned things, in the past year through friends and even just how like a lot of influencer marketing works that I didn't realize in terms of the degree to which things are photo edited and 15 different versions of the photo taken, and you don't really think about that because you have a gut reaction. So I think we've seen influencer marketing go towards a much more honest place, but that honesty is still manufactured. And I think really what you're going to see is influencers be celebrated more for their POV than they once were. They'll be treated more as authors than they will be as kind of people that are loud and have a following. I'm really interested in technology, but I'm more interested in the technology that people use but don't fully use. That's the most fascinating thing to me. So, if you think about the A word, which I can't say because she'll turn on, the thing people most use it for is kitchen timers and playing music. We have all these skills that are built in. There's so many capabilities, and yet we use it for two things. Just because you can doesn't mean you will, right? I've gone on many a rant against VR because of this. Because people say, yes, but you could meet in real life, and you could. I'm like, yes, and you could, but people will not. And so that's always been the most interesting thing to me, is really thinking about technology through the lens of what people need versus what it can do, and sort of how you design technologies to the need versus to the capability. The thing that I'm most interested in is really atmospheric technology right now. I think you start to see this with voice. You start to see this with AI coming into various platforms. We're already kind of experiencing it, but the idea of understanding my mood and being able to make small tweaks and small nudges in my environment to address that, both positively and negatively, I think is really where we're going to be. So it won't be the big, gigantic leaps, I think, because a lot of this technology, we've gone from hardware-based technology leaps to now software-based technology leaps. Yeah. And so that's really where I think it will be, is it's going to be a much more responsive world that we live in, which is kind of weird because when you think about it, by 2025, and arguably today, we all live in our own personal worlds in a different way than we probably ever have in the past.